Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Running the Gauntlet here in Ultimate Alliance 3. We are into the final chapter. That is the Phase 3 Gauntlets of the Shadow of Doom DLC expansion. There are 4 different gauntlets to consider, and today we will be focusing on the level 210 Doomsday Gauntlet run. Though this is only a 3-segmented gauntlet, it is fairly intense, so we will go through what you need to expect for the full clear conditions as well as the different segments of this run. The first section, of course, is a confrontation where we need to take down 50 different enemies, including Miss Marvel and Captain Marvel. Miss Marvel spawns in right off the bat, and she runs around with a couple of Doom bots, both the variety that charge around and do melee attacks, as well as those who have the rocket-powered range capacity increase. There are a couple of danger room hazards that are around, mainly in the form of some electrical hazards, and that's just right off the bat, as those are scattered across the 2 different sides of this cafeteria and prison area. You will want to keep an eye out for any of the reticles from the Doombots spawning around you, as those reticles can and do mean that you have a very high damage rocket incoming, and you either need to roll out of the way or otherwise take cover. Now, because there are 2 bosses included in this 50-person gauntlet that we're taking down, you will notice that we take a fair amount of liberal constraints when it comes to taking on the rest of the opponents here in order to get the secondary boss to spawn, as it is towards the tail end of the gauntlet here. Now, we are resorting to an effect that will drag the opponents closer to each other, and then finishing them off with the area of effect attack here from Thanos Infinite, as he really helps us out quite a bit in finishing out these gauntlet runs. We dash it around whenever we are unable to pull them together into one area, or when they're lined up in a pretty easy area, because that dash attack does have quite a bit of range and a shorter charging period than some of the other effects. You'll notice that I have my extreme attacks online, though I will be holding on to those for the time being, as there is a better opportune moment, and you need to keep in mind that with Captain Marvel, when she spawns in, she has 2 protective shield generators that spawn in as well. Thanos Infinite was in a very dangerous spot there a moment ago, so I did back down and set up the area to draw the opponents all in together, as well as heal him up a little bit. And at this stage, we can take down Captain Marvel as well. Now, Captain Marvel has the curse attribute where she will pull you in, and that is concurrent with her abilities, or with those different shield generators that spawn in around her as well. With her out of the way now, all we need to do is round up the remaining of these Doombots, and this final missile throw ought to just about do the trick, and we've got one final missile that we can throw over to get the remainder of those kills. And that brings us into the second section of the Gauntlet run, which is going to be a all-out slogfest. We've got to defeat 300 enemies, and there are members of the Marvel Knights that will appear as a part of this fight as we progress along. We're very much going to use the same strategy, or a very similar strategy at the very least, to what we've seen before, with the caveat of there being a lot of extra projectiles that are dropped by the various different Doombots and Sentinels that spawn in here. And that brings us to an analysis of the clear conditions, because now that you see what to expect here, it gets pretty standard, and we rinse and repeat a lot of the same actions to get through these opponents as they show up. So we do need to clear through this gauntlet once, all 3 sections, and once you've been able to determine exactly what is required, you should be able to do that fairly easily. The second section, which this chapter in particular is excellent for, is dealing 5 million damage or more with thrown objects. And honest to goodness, because of the sheer amount of thrown objects that are available in this section in the form of these rockets, as well as a couple of explosive canisters up here on this ledge just out of frame. There is no reason you cannot get that 5 million damage threshold within a single run of this gauntlet. You saw there that Elsa Bloodstone spawned in, and just as quickly as she came up, she was gone because of the difference of the explosive damage being dealt by these thrown objects that are here. And we just happened to hit her right at the opportune moment. Moving back along here, we also need to defeat 250 powerful enemies, which does include powerful or mighty enemies. This one you probably will not be able to do in one singular run of the gauntlet, but in a secondary run you certainly should be able to get that taken care of, especially with the way that this second section is meant to work, and with all of the powerful enemies that come in the form of these Doombots and Sentinels. The final area of interest is getting a score of 600,000 or more, and like I've said 1,000 times before, you just need to run the gauntlet enough times to reach that score and you'll be in the clear. Now at this stage we have one final opponent who has spawned in, and that is none other than Punisher. So we employ a very similar tactic to what we saw in the first section, where we detonate all of our extreme attacks into the area where Punisher is, and just like that he goes down, leaving us with about 50 other opponents that we need to take on, which we will be doing with the exact same strategy that we've been using in this section, as it is highly efficient. We'll throw around a couple of these rockets, sentinel cores, anything we have that explodes into the large clusters of opponents. Now you don't need Thanos Infinite for this, though he does make it a lot easier. You could feasibly do this with any other opponent who has a gravity effect on them. A perfect example of that would be Cable, as Cable has the option to localize enemies as well. But this brings us into the third and final section of this gauntlet, which is the most challenging, mainly because of the mechanic that we have to deal with. And that is the fact that we have 1 minute on the timer and a lot of pretty high-powered enemies here. As you can see, there are some large insectoid enemies that we have to take on and face and confront, but we are able to make some pretty quick work of them as we progress through the level, mainly due to the large, sizable amount of power that I have on my side, with the entire team being up at over level 200 at this stage. In this section, we could move right along because this is a non-mandatory combat area, but because of the limited time, I did think it prudent to take a brief amount of time to fight out a couple of these enemies, especially where these large insectoids do grant 20 seconds upon being defeated. I also want to make sure that we take care of the danger room hazards, because those are just not fun to have to deal with at all. So we've got this final insectoid over here that we can take out after defeating the smaller grunts, and that ought to get us at a very nice and healthy time level as well. Now, the difference, or the difficult part about this negative zone, is you don't want to get turned around. So just make sure that you keep in mind that anytime you're needing to progress to the next section of the level, you want to be heading in an upwards direction. If you're heading downstairs, you are going the wrong way. So you need to turn around and go the other way. Now, there are a couple of enemies here that we could take on to increase our time counter, but there is a mandatory combat section up ahead, which will give us plenty of time to recuperate any time lost. So I am going to just power straight through here across these material bridges. And in this section, we have a total of 60 enemies which we need to take out, which I will gladly do in order to make sure that we take replenish time onto our timer, as well as progress into the final confrontation against Annihilus. And this section can be a little bit temperamental because of the pools of regeneration which are present, but the large insectoids, for whatever reason, don't seem to get a very good effect out of that unless they are standing directly on top of the pool itself. So not a whole lot to worry about there. We're at about the midway point, and as you can see, we are already at double the time that we started with for this mission, so we are doing quite well in terms of making some fabulous headway. And you do notice that there are a couple of curses present on some of these large insectoids. Primarily this one that we're combating right now has the unfortunate side effect that when he becomes defeated, he will explode into the nearby area and deal a massive amount of damage if you're not careful. But we did happen to be far enough away from the detonation just there that we don't need to worry about it. Now, because of the healing or regen pools that are present, there are a couple of the antimatter crystals that will reverse the effects of healing. Do be advised that anytime that aura is active, even from just shattering the crystal, the large crystal, and activating the lower ones, you will be taking damage from any health recovery that you have, as it is a global reversal in healing, not just a reversal for the opponents you're facing off against. We've got one or two final opponents to take on here, and that will structuralize this final material bridge, which will take us to the final area of confrontation, with a couple of small grunts in the way, but we can progress right on past them and just jump into the final fight against Annihilus after this land bridge here as well. And by Annihilus, I mean this is the place that you would regularly fight Annihilus, but instead it's Dr. Doom. I'd gotten that turned around, so please forgive me for that minor inaccuracy. And Dr. Doom has the unfortunate ability where any physical attacks that you land on him is going to deal a portion of your health back, or damage back to you, which is not my favorite mechanic. That being said, you can completely negate that mechanic by staggering him out, and thankfully this dash attack from Thanos Infinite is not considered to be direct contact, and as soon as we switch over to another teammate that has an ability attack, we can take them out. It's also important to note that Dr. Doom has the actual curse, which will infect the members of your team, but that's actually more of a benefit than a detriment. That is all we need to know for this section of Running the Gauntlet. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe for more daily content, and we'll see you on Wednesday for the next chapter in the Phase 3 Gauntlets. Take care, and have a great rest of your day.